Hello, I hope you guys are doing well and having a great day so far. Sorry if there's a little background noise. I wanted to make a little intro to this video so you guys know what you're getting into because it's super long. But me and one of my friends that I met a while ago had a nice long discussion about America, family, and essentially what young Americans should be doing to, you know, look for, guidance, general discussion, essentially what people should be doing more of. It was there was many different topics. It was a nice long discussion, and I plan on doing more of these more often. And if you would like to come on, please just ask me, and we'll figure it out. Yeah, we'll just figure it out. We'll figure out the Google Meet, whatever. So let's get more of these topics or more of these discussions happening with each other, with men, women, people of America, of different countries. Let's start talking, guys, and let's start discussing politics and discussing nuanced, like I said prior to, in a different video, nuanced topics and discussions. More is needed. Let me know. Stay safe, y'all, and please enjoy the video. Alrighty. Hello, everyone. I hope you guys are doing well and having a great day so far. Today, we're going to be having a discussion, whether about a bunch of different topics, and I have a guest here today, and it's a long friend of mine. I've known him for multiple years, and he's going to introduce himself right here.
What's up? My name is Matt. I'm from small town Arkansas. I've grown up pretty well. Got a lot of great influence around my life, and if I do say so myself, I'm decently advocated. I'm in a good position that I am. I've known Noah for a long time. We've done these things quite often. Sometimes with a crowd of people that are very against us, but right now it's just me and him, and that's the main focus. Bouncing ideas off of each other. That's going to be this whole discussion, and one informant to the next. I look forward to this.
Me too. And that's something we can start off today with is the fact that people, I don't think, who disagree are bouncing enough points off of each other and having discussions where they're able to learn and have conversations and come to this agreement, like they agree to disagree, or even coming up with new solutions where they're able to, like I said in the other video, nowadays we're at a point in time where we don't have to fight to prove a point. We can have a conversation and come to new solutions, especially if we disagree with each other. So I think more of that needs to be done.
Right, and that's definitely a privilege we've been given, by the state that we live in, the country that we live in. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression. I agree with that. Like modern times, people are always behind a phone. They seem kind of cowardice and very kind of shut down when they're disagreed with. Instead of fighting for what I wouldn't say fighting, but interacting for what they believe in, they're more prone to shut down and completely disagree, and then sometimes even throw insults. That's not room for big exposure nor big discussion. A good advice that I've been given majority of my life is to be a sponge, absorb what's around you, whether you agree with it or not.
Exactly, and we both had a little note for conversation about our generation, and that's something I think I've seen a bit is that when people get challenged or when they start getting a little bit pressed about what they think, they completely shut down or they'll stop wanting to say anything or whatever it may be. I feel like I've seen that a bit with our generation.
I agree. There's definitely a big difference between pride and a sense of hostility. You should have pride in what you believe in. I respect that. I do. And you should have enough pride to be able to sit down, have a civil discussion with somebody about it. If you really believe it and you're going to stand on it, I think you should be able to talk to somebody one-on-one like this and not be hostile, not give a bad image to what you believe in. You know what I'm saying? Because it only diminishes your side.
Especially when you're attacking the person, like when you're
Right.
going out of your way to demean somebody, not make point, like not actually stay on discussion or on topic. That's something I've seen on that app that we met on. Like when these debate lives go on, it'll get a little bit controversial. Somebody will say something that another person doesn't want to hear, and then that person will attack them.
Right.
because they said something that they didn't agree. Well, I wouldn't say didn't agree with. Well, yeah, they didn't agree with it, and it caused them to feel a type of way.
Right. Yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of that, doing what we did when we were younger.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would much rather a person give me a valid point, valid reason, or even just say, hey, I don't know how to combat what you just said.
Right.
You know, let me do my research. Let me get more informative. I
Mhm.
respect that. Even if they are right, I might be wrong. That happens. We're
Mhm.
not always right. We're human beings.
Mhm. Exactly.
You know,
And that's what life is about. I feel like people forget that is with pride, being prideful for what you believe in is super important, but then it's also that aspect that you need to kneel down when you aren't on the right or when you are in the right.
right.
I feel like that's something that both sides, whether it be I want to say the left or the right, or whether it be anybody on any side of anything, people have a problem with doing. I think that's the human condition. People just
Right.
have a problem with like admitting that they're wrong. Accountability.
Right. I think it's partially to do with the way, like, especially our generation and the up and coming generation, they're not prone to stand on what they believe in. They're prone to like, I wouldn't say absorb, but take in and try to digest and then regurgitate what they just saw. You know,
Instead of create.
in some bases, I have hope for our generation and the younger ones
Right.
that they create something off of that. They create their own idea. Because that's something great. That's a privilege that we've been
Right.
given. You know, freedom to think. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying?
And
Everybody should have that privilege, and I don't think it's being used the way it should be used for the I say the build up of a future nation. The build up for the better of our country. It's not being used. It's there, but it's not being applied.
being capitalized on. And I think that while it's not being used and while it's right in front of people's faces, I think that's the problem, that people don't know how to capitalize on it, or maybe they just don't want to capitalize on it. I don't know what it is, because people all have these social media apps and they have opportunities to speak with anybody they want to. Like me and you, if without social media, we would have never had an opportunity to speak in our lifetime. Like
That's right.
50 years ago, never. So the fact that we have the opportunity to do this nowadays and people still aren't capitalizing off of it, where you can talk to somebody across the world and then see what they got going on, and if they speak English as well, then have a competent conversation about geopolitics, whatever it may be. People don't know that it exists.
Right.
It's
I
kind of
feel
weird.
like it's kind of clouded by, I guess, a bad application of just kind of brain rot. You know, not using it for good. Like what we did. We would go on these lives, and we would put out our information of what we know.
Mhm.
And instead of, sometimes people would counter it, give an argument to it. They would reap hostility. They would say whatever they thought was fit for it that
Mhm.
didn't seem very fit.
Mhm.
So it's not a great application. Well, it is a great application, but it's not being used, like you said.
Right. And
But you can only have hope.
you can
That's what we're doing.
Right, exactly. And that's one thing that I want to encourage people to do, is not only have faith, but act on it, like actually go out of your way and do something. Because I feel like there's a lot of people being complacent and only doing enough to get by to the next day. So being able to, especially with America, and if we have like the free time to like watch a movie or a show, we should have the free time to start trying to build something, starting to create something new, like that type of concept, because I feel like people aren't using their time wisely, and we're only on here, like on this earth, for a limited amount of time.
I agree with that. It's all about purpose.
Mhm.
You have a purpose and a duty to do something, and that's whatever you seem fit for.
Mhm.
You give that calling to yourself.
Mhm.
I feel like people are kind of discouraged, especially in modern times, with everything around us kind of booming and growing.
Mhm.
People will get held back by that. They're like, okay, well, this company's big, this company's big. why can't your company be big? You know what I'm saying? You start from somewhere. Nothing started, you have to start something from nothing.
Mhm.
It's like this. You know how many great innovations have started from conversations just like this?
Exactly.
You know?
And people, I think something I've heard is that people think that they can't, especially nowadays when they see like big corporations, whether it be BlackRock or all these big, big times people and CEOs, they think that they don't have a place or something like I'm not totally sure because I don't have that mentality. But I've seen people think that they're not even capable of conceiving or being able to do something like that. But it's like, why not even try? Like I don't it's those people in those big corporations started with an idea and then worked every day to actually make it come to fruition. So I'm not sure what these people think is capable. I think that's a lot of things that people nowadays have a struggle with is their own like their own limitations and what they're actually able to be able to conceive of and make a plan and being able to carry out that plan.
Yeah, I agree with that. Humans are very, they're innovative. They're capable of many things. Look, I mean, look at all around us. Humans made all of this. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? And uh, it's like they kind of succumb to the defeat, like you said, the big corporations. It's like going, playing a powerhouse of a football team, and you have the idea that you're going to lose. You've kind of already lost in that sense. You
Mhm.
know, you might think to yourself, why even play? You got to do it for the challenge. For the chance. If people never took risk and based off of that maybe 1% chance of success, a lot of things wouldn't have been done.
We wouldn't be here today. With
Exactly.
America, those people who came across the Atlantic Ocean on wooden boats, that would have never happened. If
Right.
people were like, "Oh, we couldn't start a new nation completely offset from Britain, the king, the ruler at the time," that looked impossible. I mean, think about the inconceivable odds, let alone, especially if you go back to like even ancient history with Genghis Khan or like all these people, all these ancient rulers, how it started with whatever it started with. Because I'm not that deep read in history with all these things, but it had to start with an idea. And it definitely didn't start with 100,000 million or however many people behind it. So
Right. A lot to do with that is like the spread of knowledge. It's like what we're doing. You know, if anybody takes anything from this video, it's getting yourself out there, spreading your knowledge, bouncing ideas, because that makes things happen.
mhm,
If you really apply it, I mean, which you can, and there's no excuse in modern America that you can't apply a good idea
mhm.
because you have nothing but freedom to, talk, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, you know, and, that's how, like you said, that's how countries are made. That's how things are founded. I can only imagine how, maybe George Washington felt trying to fight a whole nother country that started that little plantation or that
Mhm,
little seceding nations of 13 colonies. You
mhm.
know, how I don't even know how to do that, but it's a courage thing too.
And I feel like we should do a segue on what men and women, what people of America or people around the world should be doing to either find themselves of being a better man or being a better woman. I feel like with two men, we can definitely have a conversation about young men and what it is to be a better man. And that whole entire concept, I feel like, doesn't get talked about as much as it should. Like, it gets talked about in the sense of like the red pill, the manosphere, and all that type of concept. But on a general, like being a man, on like what a man should be, I don't think that really gets talked about between the older generation and younger generation.
Right. I feel like a lot to do with that has to do with the change of how to raise a kid.
Mhm.
How that's kind of evolved over time. You're not really in some cultures, and I say cultures in different areas of the United States. There's a lot of different methods of application being used on how to raise a kid, how to teach a young boy how to be a man. Fortunately, like us, we were raised with very good fathers, and they taught us from you know kind of
Right.
day one what it is to be a man.
Mhm.
You know, I feel like a lot of what comes with that is, you know, understanding how to start. You know, I feel like the first step of being a good man is, you know, having a self-worth. You know, knowing that you're worthy, knowing that you're capable of doing what you could do. Um, and then applying that. You know, if you feel like you're capable of something, you have no excuse, no reason to not think you could do it. Um, and it's kind of goes on to the thing, like you said, how to be a man. You know, that's a rough question, but however, there is answers for it. You know,
Mhm.
I don't think it's a I don't think it's a status thing nor a money thing. I think it's a behavior thing and a characteristic.
Mhm.
You know, in my opinion, I believe a good man or a man itself is somebody that's reliable, somebody that's accountable, someone that's willing to be disciplined enough to be there when they need to be there.
Mhm.
You know, be there right time, right equipment, you know, right self of being
Ready to
to
solve
be able to
problems.
help somebody. Right. You know, because you know this will go into probably the next conversation is how to be a man within a family. You know,
Mhm.
how to apply a man into a family. Um, but yeah, you know, I like I said, it's definitely to do with you know the change of the upbringing of people. You
Mhm.
know, I feel like we were raised differently. You know,
Mhm.
we were definitely taught how to be a man with different disciplines, and that's a big thing too, discipline.
Mhm.
You know, yeah,
And I think another big point with that, that a very big aspect that we have that I don't know with the general population is that we know our fathers and we know what type of men that they were and how to improve off of that, and that we essentially know where we came from in all sense of the word. And I'm not sure with the current day's generation that they want to learn where they came from, their lineage, their father, their family. I feel like there's a big disconnect with, I don't know, whether it be social media, whether it be whatever it may be, but people are getting more disconnected from their families than ever before. And they're losing out on values, traditions, recipes that are getting lost to time that have been around for hundreds, if not, thousands of years. And I feel like that's something that needs to get discussed about more, is that family structure, what it is, how important it is, and how that is something that people need to have to lean on.
I agree with that. You know, I remember, you know, that brings me an idea when I was younger, and you know, from a young age, I was always kind of from the time I was like 10 to 12. You know, any vehicle that was kind of that needed a tire replaced or brakes changed or something like that, my dad would teach me how to do it and help me do it so I could do it.
Mhm.
You know, and eventually I did it on my own. He'd just be there watching me, you know, making sure I didn't get hurt or you know, do something wrong. You know, eventually, you know, I was tired of it. I'm a young kid, you know, I'm a young boy, not a man yet, but
Mhm.
I was definitely like, you know what, I'm gonna start charging people. And he's like, no, you don't charge family. You know, that's not something you do.
Mhm.
You're here for the family. Um, you know, family is bond. Family is everything. You know that a family kind of molds you in a
Mhm.
sense. You know, you have different characteristics about yourself because of your family,
Mhm.
whether that be good or bad. Um, you know, an application of a man within a family, it could be in anything. For like us, you know, I'm not the pinnacle of my family. I am no way or form the center of my family. I have a decently sized family. I'm very fortunate, very grateful for them. You know, I don't talk to them as much as as I do. And that's not because I'm distancing myself. It's just because, you know, I live in a different state and I'm far away.
And then
Um, right. I do what I can. But however, me being me and being taught the things that I was taught, I was somewhat reliable. You know, I somewhat, you know, hey, if somebody didn't want to do something, work on something, I could do it. You know, maybe I didn't want to, but I learned a lesson in that. You know, and that's the thing. You know, it goes into like doing things that you don't want to do. That's what I think that's also goes into being a man. You know, you don't always have to want to do something, but for you to get up, wake up every morning and do it anyways, you have a
Mhm.
chip on your shoulder from that. You know, you should take pride in that. You should take some joy in that. You should hold your head up higher for that because not everybody does that nowadays.
And that's something that, with that being said, because I feel like people who are listening might take certain things that we're saying a certain way, because I feel like a woman can also wake up and do shit that they don't want to do and still do it anyways, because my mom talks about it a lot. But with what a man should be is, and I see this, is that rock, that foundation that when people come to, that they can confide in and know that this person can give sound advice and give them a solution to a problem that they have, or more on not like a therapist, but like a genuine mentor, like a person that they can confide in, a rock.
Right.
And also, additionally, more on that, I think that with men, with us having a monopoly on strength, we need to be physically capable of defending people when need be.
Right. I definitely agree with that. You know, like you said, being someone that people can come to, you know, and a lot of times it's not like you have to have answers. Sometimes it's just listening to somebody, you know, after your significant other has a bad day at work, you know, sit down and listen to them. You know, that goes into what we were just talking about, you know, the youth of our nation right now. And a lot of things is listening, absorbing it. You know, you may not even have to give feedback, but to be there and be someone to listen,
Mhm.
you know, it moves worlds. It can do a lot. And yeah, you know, it's not about, you know, wisdom. It's not about being old.
Right.
You know, it's about being a, like you said, a rock, a strong structure that people can kind of pinnacle to.
Mhm.
You know, you may not be the highest, you know, I say ranking, you know, especially what I do now, but you may not be the you know, highest person in your family, but you're still somebody. You're still reliable. You know,
Mhm.
you're not a liability, like you said. And when you're not physically, and I say this, not physically fit, you know, I have for me, I have, you know, somewhat irrational fears, but one of my biggest fears is not being able to protect my family, you
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
you know, not being able to be there for that, not being able to physically, you know, be a cause or a use of help.
Mhm.
You know, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but I think it was a hurricane a few years ago, and this Coast Guard guy, he's in the picture. He looks big and beefy. And he's carrying this woman, and in front of him is the husband. He
Mhm.
kind of looks out of shape, and he's carrying like a bag or her flip flops. It's like, which man would you rather be? Would you rather be the guy carrying his wife, or would you rather be the husband? You know, in a sense, watching another person having to do that job for you.
Mhm. That's a good point that you just made, and I think that's something that our generation and actually like millennials and even the generation before the millennials are having a struggle with, is that what you just said is, would you rather be the man who's actually taking care of business, handling business, or the woman that's actually taking care of business or handling business, or the one that's getting taken care of? Um, with whether it be Section 8, welfare, food stamps, all of these things that cause a person to be dependent on something else. It's very interesting that people, you know, champion these things and really want them to continue to be more widespread. And while I understand they are essential programs, you have to, the human nature and the human mind, they get comfortable. And when you get comfortable, things like that happen where you get put in a situation and you have to ask somebody else to help your own family, and you won't be able to. And while you could have in the situation if you were strong enough.
Right. I like to say a little phrase: complacency kills.
Mm.
You know, it definitely leaves you vulnerable when you're too comfortable in a situation and you don't feel like you are, you know, have to be up to standard anymore. You digress, right? And you never know what's going to happen in the future. Nobody can predict the future.
Mhm.
However, you know, with unfortunate events, anything can happen. You know, like you said, it doesn't have to be like, you know, you go to the gym every day and you know, bust your ass. You know, I'm sure that man in that picture that was holding that was the husband to that woman. I'm sure he could do it,
Right.
but you know, it's all about the challenge. You know, nobody wants to challenge their minds or their bodies anymore.
Mhm.
You know, like complacency. You know, I could take anybody in the world right now and you know put enough pressure on them to be able to do that. You know, be able to hold that woman for half a mile.
Mhm.
It's not you know a weight room thing. It's a mental thing. You know, everything that you do in application has to do with here. You know, it's all about a good mentality. That's how you build a strong basis for these things. You know, if I was to give advice, you know, for, you know, back to our youth and how to be a man in this topic, I wouldn't say, oh, go hit the gym. You know, that might help, but do something that betters your mentality. Do something that, hey, this gives you the sign to say, hey, you know, I could be better. I could do this. I could do that. Give yourself a sense of purpose, whether that may be, you know, going to the gym, going on a run, you know, being on a computer, programming a website. Give yourself a sense of purpose. That's what we lack nowadays, I feel.
And additionally, more on that, challenge yourself. Like, don't make the sense of purpose so easy that you know you can accomplish that and like that. Make sure that it is challenging enough that you can take up, like it's a feat, you know, and then especially when you accomplish that, what that does to your mind and mentality, and how you know that you can not only accomplish what you just did, but that you can accomplish these things and move on to accomplish even greater things than that.
I won't give names, you know, like what I've done in my career so far, but you know, I've been in, you know, pretty rigorous training, and the defier is, you know, waking up in the morning. That's always the hardest part. You know, I realize that, you know, you're sore, you're aching, you're waking up, you know, 4:30, 5:30 in the morning. And, you know, the first thing you got to do before you eat breakfast is to get cold and wet again. You know, nobody wants to do that. I never wanted to do that. That sucked. But it's the challenge. It's like, okay, I get over this barrier, right? And I get out of complacency. I get out of my comfort. You know, a lot of people like to stay in comfort. If I were to lay in bed, you know, I might be satisfied within that first, you know, 30 minutes, but, you know, I know I'd be behind in the long run, you know, and that's just going to, you know, digress my position. You know, it's getting over that big hurdle, you know, and sometimes it's not a big hurdle. It's just in the position that you're in, it might seem intimidating. You know, it might be hard to get out of bed, but getting out of bed is the first step. And if you look at you know, you can't eat an elephant in one bite. You have to go bite by bite, you know, and maybe that first bite isn't that big, but maybe that first bite's just taking the covers off of you, you know, getting that cold exposure that you don't want to feel, you know, and that'll, you know, that could progress into something.
Snowball effect. You know,
That's
once it gets rolling, it gets rolling.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
I feel like we should leave this off with a message to America and Americans, what should be expected of us in the coming months, the coming years, you know, the decades and centuries that are coming for us as a United States of America. What should be expected of us?
You know, we hit on the family aspect. You know, family is everything. You know, as a country itself, you know, we are in a sense a family. You know, love thy neighbor. You know, we are 1,000 miles away, but you know, I fucking, you know, you're my guy. I love you, man.
Love you too.
And you don't have to agree with somebody to love them. You know, that's the problem with our modern politics, is that, you know, they're too divided. You know, especially with what just happened, you know, this week. You know, it could have went two ways. It could have went, you know, we could see this as a point to stand on of like, hey, you know, we're all human beings at the end of the day. You know, I'm just as human as you. I need to respect that. I need to understand that. You know, if you can't make a meal or serve somebody that opposes you, it's not a good thing. You know, and I feel like I do that every day. You know, I fight for the feel like I fight for the freedom of people to, you know, say what they want to say, do what they want to do. You know, in a good application. You know, I hope our country kind of, you know, unites again. That's what I really like to see, because if we're against each other and other people are against us, how strong are we really going to be? Yeah.
And that's one big thing about, with whether it be Democrats, Republicans, right, left, conservative, liberal, we have the opportunity in the big 2025 to actually come together and have conversations and come up with new solutions that people would not even have been able to conceive of hundreds, thousands of years ago, hundreds or thousands of years ago. It's insane what we can be capable of now, whether it be with technology and using it for good and actual good, publicizing and giving people a platform to have these debates and discussions like Charlie Kirk did, where we can willingly disagree with each other on a public stage at a college campus, with the young youth being able to come up and conversate with each other and discuss political opinions and political discussions and the nuances of these things that are happening on a day-to-day basis that do affect us in the long run. We should be discussing about things like this more. And I'm not sure. I think while it shouldn't have took this, I think Charlie Kirk's death did wake a lot of people's mind up to what is going on nowadays and the severity of the situation in America. While people still might, not care, or they might not think it applies to them, this is trying times, actually revolutionary times, I would say, in America, and it can go many ways for our future. So I would say that we should be able to have discussions, liberals, conservatives, right, left, and even more on that, we have a voting system that isn't just a two-party system. I think people forget about that we have, we can have 100,000 different parties that all fight for different things that can get voted into office under presidency. And maybe if people exercise that vote, that something might change. I don't know.
Right. I agree with that. The last third party to get voted in was the Bull Moose Party. That's probably, I honestly don't know the actual facts of the time that it was, but let's say the early 1900s, probably 1910s to 1930s.
Over 100 years ago.
Yeah, over 100 years ago, but that doesn't mean it can be applied now. I agree with that. There's too much, left or right. That's not the only options we have. We have a center line, and we have different parties that branch off of each one, and they might have better ideas. They might apply morally and policy wise to what you believe. Mm-hmm. You don't always have to vote red or blue. Mm-hmm. America is made of three colors: red, white, and blue. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely.
I don't like that there's so much divinity within our nation. I say divinity. There's a big divide, and right? It makes me sad to see. I don't feel like we should be so against each other. That's like I said before, that's not great. That makes us weak as a nation. I believe we should challenge each other, but I don't think we should reach a hostility. I think everybody should have a standpoint of I could disagree with you, and then after our discussion that we disagree on, with no hostility, we should go have dinner. In a lot of applications of what I do, I could disagree with somebody, then I could go grab a drink with them. Because that's beyond us. We are human beings. We should resort to human being methods. It's not always a fight thing. It's a branch of unification. A unification could really spark our nation.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
I'm sorry. No, carry on.
With the whole entire world as well, that while we all are extremely different, race, creed, color, culture, all of that, while we all do want the best for our children and all want our culture to continue down to our children, we still should be able to confide in each other, to not have division around the world. We should be able to share cultures if they so please. We should not exile people just because they share a different culture than us. We should be able to have conversations and actually come to solutions with each other. Period.
Right. See, I can't go to Germany and become a German. I can't go to Russia and become a Russian. Right. But a Russian can come to the US and become an American.
Right.
And that's something so beautiful that I love about America, is that we aren't just one person. There's not just one type of us everywhere. We are a melting pot of different cultures, different lineage, different backgrounds of people that unite, right? It's the United States of America. It's never just black or white. It's a combination, and I feel like that combination can be applied to us. If we really apply that, we could be so greater than what we really are.
Using our strengths. And that is one huge strength in America, is that we have properly, I feel like we've lost out on that, but properly integrating people into what America and the United States of America is, and that, like you said, we can't go to China and become Chinese, you know what I'm saying? Ethnic, like, you know what I'm saying? But people can come over here and become a national American, period. I find that very interesting. And that is a big strength that we do have. And as long as those people who are coming over here share the same like strength and passion to improve our country as they did their own home country, you know what I mean? Instead of, I feel like a big issue nowadays is that we're having a lot of people send money outside of the country and is not bringing money back into the country. While they're making money in the country, they're not investing here. They're investing in, you know, all these other places around the world. So, and that's their choice, you know, freedom of choice. But I think Americans should take into realize that we need to do some fixing up around here. Like, there needs to be some genuine changes for the better. And we have been complacent. Complacency kills. We've sat around and waited too long, and it's gotten to the point where the society's kind of degraded, but it's not too late. Like, we still have the opportunity to change things right now, but it's right now though. We have to change it right now. So that's my standpoint on it.
I agree with that. You know, for every problem, you know, you may have and you seek a change, it always has to start from within. You know, I think our next move of action should be within our own borders, within our own territory, within our own people. You know, we don't have to keep helping, you know, other countries and different things. You know, that is them, we are we. You know, we have to help ourselves before we can help other people. You know, I think America's grown weaker than what people may think. I feel like some people may think that, you know, America is just a big money pit or a big money pot that's, you know, infinite and they could do anything around the world. You know, there is some truth to that. You know, we can do a lot of things around the world, but I feel like there's too much conflict, there's too much problem, there's too much disagreeing and divinity within our nation to really be effective for other countries.
Let alone too many problems. Like, we are supposed to be the best country, and I personally, and I know you share my same opinion that we are the best country in the world, but we don't lead in education, we don't lead in health, we don't lead in all of these things that a successful society should be leading in, hypothetically. So we got to fix things. I mean, people should not be morbidly obese. Like, and that's like, even though, like, again, you have the choice, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And the fact that people, like, I think the biggest death toll in America right now, the thing that's killing the most Americans, is heart disease. I'm pretty sure that is the case. Like, I'm not 100% sure. I know it's the top 3 for sure, that it's heart disease and like cardiac issues, things that overweight people have, unhealthy people have problems with. We got to fix that. That should not be a problem. Same thing with the education system. There is no way in a society like this that it should be that bad. But then again, I think the problem is that we have states, and then in each different state, in each different city, more on that, the funding, the education, it's all different. And I don't know how to fix that yet, but we should have more conversations about how to.
You know, I feel like kind of rebuilding and reestablishing a Department of Education would definitely be a great help. You know, setting bars and standards that these, you know, like you said, different cities, different states have to meet. You know, there should be a minimum standard, and that shouldn't be low.
And something that, man, and that's something that you just touched on. My school, and Richwood High School, they would straight up pass people. Like, I visually seen this in public school. They would push people to pass. So and I'm assuming this is how this works because it's a public school. They need funding. And if their students aren't passing their grade, then the government's like, okay, what are you doing? Obviously something's not right here. So these schools, these public schools, get the incentive to just push people forward, to get the incentive to not really teach them, just have them pass with a D and have them get the degree and fuck off. Excuse my language, I'm gonna have to beep that. But it's actually asinine to me that people don't see that as a problem. That, okay, now I have my high school degree, but did you even learn anything? Like, did you even retain any knowledge from high school and learn a thing? And it shouldn't take going to private school. It shouldn't take going to charter school, to going to all these places for you to learn basic, simple education. Like, it's just absurd to me. Like, it's actually absurd.
I definitely agree with that. You know, I feel like our education system's definitely declined on that, because you're right. They are just pushing students out the door, you know, giving them a diploma, letting them leave. You know, I'm not saying I was ever the best student. I definitely wasn't. You could ask my father that. I was not the greatest student. But, you know, I went my whole senior year of high school without doing a piece of paper of homework.
Mhm.
I don't feel like now I should have been able to do that.
Mhm.
You know, I don't think my son should be able to do that. In the time, I thought that was awesome. That was great. It was easy. But I don't think that easiness helped me.
Mhm.
You know, I'm in a position now where I have to study all the time
Mhm.
to apply what I know from the past and what I'm seeing on a paper to an actual situation that could be life or death.
Mhm.
You know, and that could go with anything outside of, you know, what I do. That could go in a trade. You know, if you can't weld right, you could kill somebody. You know, if you can't run a machine right, you could kill somebody.
Mhm.
You know, and that goes with a common sense thing, but it also goes with, like, you know, I feel like schools nowadays only teach you what they teach you on a piece of paper, but they don't teach you how to learn very well.
Mhm.
You know, how to absorb information. They don't
Oh.
teach you very many study techniques.
Mhm.
You know, I feel like that would definitely help our youth, definitely help the you know, our education system.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And definitely, and I've seen nowadays they're starting to be more harsh on the phones in classrooms, and I've also seen people complain about it. And we can talk for hours, and I want to have a little bit of a shorter discussion so people can digest this. But leaving off with the phones in the classrooms, what do you go to school for? You go to school to learn. You're not there to you're not there to mess around, to goof around. You're there to socialize. Yeah, sure, you can make friends, but you're there to learn. Number one priority, you're learning. You're not there to be on a damn phone. Excuse my language again, but it's like, come on, bro. It's annoying. But that's where we should leave it off, Matt.
I definitely agree with that statement. You know, I do understand what they feel. My last 2 years of high school, 3 years of high school, you know, we can only keep our phones in our pockets. We could not be on our phone in class. You know, I don't know what effect that did, but it definitely made me, you know, pay attention more to my work and what's in front of me than what's in my pocket.
Mhm.
You know, because I couldn't resort to that. You know, I couldn't resort to that, you know, that dopamine exchange between me and my phone.
Mhm. That
But
part.
I definitely agree with that. You know, you are there to learn. You are there to be a student. You,
Mhm.
in a sense, they define being a professional as being paid to do something. But I think you're a professional student because you may not be being paid. You may not be paid anything, but you are giving something in return. Knowledge. You know,
Mhm.
knowledge works wonders.
Mhm. And final note, always continue gaining that knowledge, continue to learn, regardless, not if you are in school, there's still opportunities to read books, to actually go out of your way to learn. You know, we're on the internet. There's so many free books out there, free audiobooks, free everything. So please continue to learn, continue to gain knowledge, continue to gain knowledge about your country, about what, you know, the things that we should be doing and the solutions that we should be having. Those type of things we must have in nowadays in the big 2025. But yeah, Matt, it's been an amazing talk. We keep talking for hours. All right, signing off. Have a great night, y'all. Stay safe.